Okay, excellent. Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the slight delay. So we were looking at I think we touched on it very briefly, but I don't think we dealt with it properly. Omer of Nachman, Omer Shmuel, Cheres Katana Mutter L'Taltel L'Chotzer, Avol B'Kamelis Loi. So Rav Nachman, in the name of Shmuel's view is that this Cheres Katana can only be moved in a chotzer, but not in a karmelis. It's mukt in a karmelis. And Rav Nachman himself says, no, it is allowed in a karmelis. So I think I just touched last year on the machlokas Rashi and Rabbeinu Chananel. Rashi, to the best of my understanding, Rashi is coming to explain why Rav Nachman would allow in a karmelis, but not in a Rishos Harabim. In other words, if Rav Nachman accepts Shmuel's svara in opposition to Rava, who says that even in Rishos Harabim it's not Muktza, that means he accepts that if it's not usable because it's not in a chotzer, then it would be Muktza. So Rava says even in Rishos Harabim it's not Muktza. So Rava doesn't care about location. But if Rav Nachman agrees with Shmuel that location does matter, then why would he say that a karmelis is okay? Surely you can't carry in a karmelis, just like you can't carry in a Rishos Harabim. So Rashi answers the question by saying it's just a pragmatic point. A Rishos Harabim is a very busy place, and therefore you wouldn't sit there. Whereas a karmelis is drabonon, it's a Rishos Harabim because it's open, it's unfenced, but nonetheless it's not busy like Rishos Harabim, and therefore people sit there, and therefore it's not Muktza. That's how Rashi learns the distinction. It's not really the halachic distinction between karmelis and Rishos Harabim that matters. It's the practical distinction, which of course generates the halachic distinction. That karmelis is a busy Rishos Harabim is a place where the rabbim go, whereas a karmelis is a place which is emptier. That's Rashi's understanding of the difference. Rabbeinu Chananel, which I printed in the source sheets. He says that this is a halachic difference. Rav Nachman's point is that a Rishos Harabim is a chiyuv min haTorah, whereas a karmelis, if you take in and out of a karmelis, it's only an issa drabonon and not chayv min haTorah, and therefore people are wrongly they should be keeping a soy drabonon, but nonetheless they're more flexible and more likely to move things in and out of a chotzer, and therefore you can't say this is mukta. It's normally it wouldn't be used in a karmelis because it's out of a chotzer. No, you can only use it in a chotzer. Nonetheless, accidents happen, slip up the curb. People are sometimes inappropriately lenient, and therefore you don't see this as completely removed from any possible hishtamshus, and therefore it's not muktzah when it's in karmelis. That's the machlokus. Now we come to Rava. So yeah.
Because you're saying something which essentially is also to move, because people moving, it no longer is muktza.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Very, very interesting. Yes. If it was osa midrabanon to use, then it would be a klisha melachot issa. Here, in and of in itself, its use is mutter. It's just its location is problematic, and therefore the question is: has it lost its usefulness? It's not that it's. Let's step back a little bit. Rava is going to argue that even in a Rishos Harabim, it's not Muktza. Now we'll see shortly. There's a number of ways of understanding Rava, but one way of understanding Rava, or even without Rava saying it, at least we could think of it, is that location shouldn't be enough of a reason to make something Muktza. Why should something become Muktza just because you can't use it in that location? It's fundamentally a kli. If you have a kli, a shoe or a plate, just because it's in a location where you wouldn't normally use it, why would that redefine the object? The location is the problem, not the object itself. So Rabbeinu Chananel would of course agree that if you have an object where the use of the object is an osa use, even midrabanon, that would be a klisha melachta le'issa. However, here it's a kli. It's got a mutter use. It just happens to be in a location where it's not normal to use. Says Rabbeinu Chananel, for that it's sufficient that that you don't see it as completely de-utensilized, de-kadiized. It doesn't cease to be a kli just because it's an indication where you wouldn't happen to use it when it's, relatively speaking, a more lenient prohibition. In a sense, Rav Nachman, I'll come in a second, in a sense, both Rav Nachman and Shmuel are the radical ones over here. You have something which is a kli. How can it be Muktza? Why does it stop being Muchan? The answer is because it's location, and therefore what? It stops being a kli. It's still a kli. It's still there, your servant. It's still there to serve you. It just happens to be in a location where it wouldn't normally be used. And that's indeed perhaps or perhaps not Rav's argument. But in such a case, Rabbi Yochanan argues that it wouldn't cease to be a kli.
Is this machloka? I can see how different in Shivrei Kelim, because Shivrei Kelim are defined by whether they have a kli use, whether they're still a kli, and that maybe that does depend on location, even though you're a shoe or a ball, and even though you expect it to be there and might not be able to move it, is still a kli. So it's defined. It's just that the Shivrei Kelim bit is different, or is this a machloka about what's considered muchan, and that it's considered muchan when it's in a chatzar, Shabbat comes in, it's muchan, and therefore it's not Muktza, whereas something in Rosh Hashanah isn't considered to be muchan at all.
So that's a very good question. Let me just summarize what I think is your question, which I wasn't going to entirely go into, but deserves to be discussed. Are Shmuel and Rav Nachman only arguing in this case over here, where it's a cheres, which is either not a great kli or Shivrei Kelim, and the whole lomdus of Shivrei Kelim not being Muktza is because they sort of hang on by the skin of their teeth to having hishtamshus, and that lingering hishtamshus which they have, Rav Nachman and Shmuel are arguing that if they're in a location where you wouldn't use it, ceases, or are they even saying if it would be a proper kli, this would be the case? Would they? Is this a machlokas not just about charothin, but about any kli in a location where it couldn't be used, which is a much more massive halacha, much more radical halacha. That's something which is mamisha a proper kli in a location which it wouldn't be useful to use. A table, like you take a table into the street. You don't sit having a picnic in the middle of the street, in the middle of the North Circular. Therefore, the table becomes Muktza. Very interesting. So I don't know of a sort of knockout blow in like an ironclad proof about this hakira. I did some sort of thumbing around the poskim and the mufashim. It's not entirely. I didn't succeed in entirely getting this clear. There's a Chazon Ish about this and others that sort of discuss it, but I don't think it's a completely resolved matter. Either way, Rav Nachman and Shmuel are machadish that at least in some scenarios, something can become Muktza if it's in a location where it can't be used. And on that, there's a tweak that Rav Nachman is saying that there's only where it really, really can't be used, where it's Chi of Misa to use it. If it would be a million Issa Drabanon, that wouldn't be enough location to redefine the object.
These objects can be used because what she does say, as long as you don't leave them more than $1. So
they technically can be used. I mean, you can use an object in a Rishus Rabbim also. The point is you wouldn't use it. Yes, correct.
is there like pots can I tell you where you come to
Okay, that's a very, very interesting question. One of the topics after we move on from Muktza, we need to think about is whether we do other melachos, and in particular, do we do the big melacha of Hotzah, which is a massive melacha and quite overwhelming. One of the big talking points in melachos Hotzah is how to define this idea that if you're Mavi Dalet Amos, you are Chayiv Min HaTorah, Mavi Dalet Amos B'Shus Rabbim, and if you move less than Dalet Amos, you are not only not Chayiv Min HaTorah, but under Be'etzem, intrinsically, it does not fall foul of Chatzi Shir Osem Min HaTorah. And there are scenarios where you can do it in a Chatzchila, where you can move it less than Dalet Amos. The logic seems to be that the measure of moving Dalet Amos is not like, if you eat a kazayis of pork, you get malchus. If you eat Chatzi kazayis of pork, it's still Chatzi Shir. But rather, if you move something less than Dalet Amos, nothing has happened. It's not a movement it's not a relocation of an object. And if it's not a relocation, then it's not Chatzi Shir, it's nothing of a Shir. So either way, less than Dalet Amos is not a Chatzi Shir. And you can even move a chaypetz without even moving it Dalet Amos. You could avoid moving it at all in certain situations. And nonetheless, it's not usual to do so, and therefore that's enough to make it Muktza, according to Rav Nachman and Shmuel. Yeah.
Just want to answer this question. I mean, is it fair to read
in Tosfos' opinion, this is definitely a studia in Shivrei Kelim.
It's a good question. Ubahani the Nishri Very Shabbos Ka'oma. Nishri Shabbos. No, no, I don't think that's correct. Tosfos is merely pointing out that if it broke on Erev, if it broke on Shabbos, then it would be nolad, and therefore according to Rava, it would anyway be Muktza. Since it broke on Erev Shabbos, therefore it has the somewhat of a din of a Kedi, and now we can have a shaila about whether that would be an Rosh Hashanah or not. Martin is now asking the next stage up. What happens if it's Mamash Kedi, a full Kedi? What would be the din? So you don't see. I don't think you see a right in Tosfos for that shaila. Yeah. Okay. So that's Rav Nachman and Shmuel. We now get to Rava, and the headlines of Rava. Rava says that no, in Rosh Hashanah it's not Muktza. And in theory, before we look at the Rishonim, there's one of two reasons you could think why Rava says this. Either he doesn't care about location. He says, ask yourself, is it a Kedi or not a Kedi? If it's a Kedi, it's Muchan. Even if it happens to be in this location, you can't use it. So in Rosh Hashanah, who cares whether in Rosh Hashanah you can use it or not? In the Chotzer, it's a Kedi. That's one svara you could say. An alternative svara of Rava's is that even in Rosh Hashanah, it has some use. And he considers the minimal use of as the Gemara, in fact, as per the story of the Gemara, where he wipes mud off his shoes, that's considered enough of a minimal use to stop something being Muktza. Now, why should that not be enough of a use to stop it being Muktza? The answer is because there's nothing special about the object you're using. You could use a stone for that just as well. It's just a wiping implement that you then discard. Nonetheless, Rava holds that's enough of a use to stop it being Muktza. So those are the two svaras you could have floating around. Either Rava doesn't care about location. He says, is it a kli or is it not a kli? Or Rava says, even in Rosh Hashanah, it has enough of a use, and Rava suffices with a really pathetic, wimpy little use that's enough to stop it being Muktza. So let's learn the Rishonim and see what they say. So Rashi, difficultly for us, seems to say both reasons, and I want to just spend a little bit of time thinking about Rashi. Rava Amar Afrishut Rabim, Kivan de Bechotza Kelihu, but Almanami no Pokashem Keli Minei. Since it's a Keli, therefore, even in the Rosh Hashanah, the Keli doesn't fall off from it. Then Rashi carries on and he says, Le Didi, Le Kinuach, it's Chazi Le Kinuach, the Afalgat Le Shchiach, Hayashem Kedi Olov, the Chotza. So in the continuation of the story, where Rava was challenged by his colleagues as to using this cheres, Rava answers according to Rashi's translation, this chaspa rather. Rava answers according to Rashi's translation, no, le didi chazi le didi le kinuach. So why does Rashi add in that it's chazi le didi kinuach? Why is that relevant? The point surely is that Harishem Kedi Olav B'chotza. So Rashi is a little confusing here. Is the lomdus that it has a use here in the Rosh Hashanah le kinuach, or is the lomdus that it is a Kedi and a chotza, and therefore I don't care that in Rosh Hashanah it has no use whatsoever? Are you with me in the difficulty of Rashi? Rashi seems to say both as far as. So it's difficult to know what to do with Rashi. So it's a Shver Rashi. Baruch Hashem, we have a Ritva who teaches us how to read Rashi, and the Ritva says this explicitly. Let's learn through the Ritva because really every word is interesting. The first 2 points of the mitzvah are a little bit going back to earlier, but let's go through them because it's important mitzvah. Cheres katana mutter l'taltel l'chotzer pirish. So ikatos kili alea. So chazal l'kasuyu beimana. In a chotzer, the cheres katana has a toes keli because you can use it to cover. Al-Kam is low to leka kli hasam because there's no kli hasam. Very powerful words that to leka kli hasam. There is no kli there. He seems to be saying that location is mafkia from its same kli. Then he carries on in Rav Nachman. What is the mitzvah? And therefore?
I'm just saying that he's just saying there are no such things as a kli. We don't find them in the canon. Therefore, it's not relevant to give a head to them.
You mean there's no kli for it to cover? No kli for it to cover. You might be right. I'm taking it too far. Okay. Let's go to the last. The middle one's also interesting. The middle one touches on what we were just talking about before. Let's just read through it quickly. Rav Nachman didei am afidu b'kamenis. Peish Rashi zal da chazi da chasis beroka tnufa. Im toma ime haitama. So Rashi says it's useful for covering roke. Fine. Im toma ime haitama choshev da ikar leitoras kli. Then kalavonim v'tzuros shebachotz b'kamenis yeitoras kli aleim. The chazi da hachi yital telling. There's nothing here that you need a kli for. You can use any random stone to cover roke. Yesh loim the shani yachat asim shiuri kli gomo. The chazanami b'chotz chasis beis akeli. So he says that it's only because it's a shiori kli, it's a leftover of a kli that has some ishtamshus to it, and therefore it's not enough to make it a kli. There's enough for it to linger being a kli. Then he says, "Rava amafilu b'shus rabim perish the chazal ifrushe beitzunufei of the Rava because you can use it to wipe dirt with, like Rava's story. Elo dahu tashrish lo chashiv lo shechiach." That tashmish is too infrequent and too unimportant. And therefore it's not enough to make it kli, as we just said in the previous paragraph. And therefore it's only because in a chotzer it's considered a kli. So the Ritva is telling us to understand Rashi to mean what we thought he was saying, that you need two conditions. Very interesting. If it wasn't a kli in a chotzer, then the fact that you can use it to wipe dirt off your shoes or trousers wouldn't be enough, or cover rake, because that's a negligible, infrequent, unimportant ishtamshus that you can use anything for. That's not enough to make something a kli. So therefore it has to be a kli in the chotzer. On the other hand, if it was just a kli in a chotzer and had no use here, then it would still be muktza. And therefore you need both conditions. So what Rava really is doing, according to Rashi, is separating the two criteria. Till now, we thought that anything that's a kli isn't mukta. Rava's saying, I think it is a kli, because in a chotz it's a kli. Nonetheless, were it to be a useless kli, it would still be mukta. Kamash malon, it's a negligibly useful kli, and therefore it wouldn't be mukta. That's seemingly the translation of the Ritva and Rashi. So just to, are you with me? So just to summarize again. Rashi and the Ritva are combining the two reasons together. I'm not entirely clear how to combine them, but I think the explanation is as follows. If you just looked at the usefulness alone, that's not enough of a use. It's not a KD use. You can use stones for it. It's not a KD use. So you need it to be a KD. Why is it a KD? Because in a chotz it's a KD. Why isn't that alone enough? In a chotz it's a KD, so there's nothing more to talk about. The answer is even Rava agrees that being a KD isn't enough to stop something being muktzah if it's completely useless. So a useless keli is muktzah. However, Rava says it's got some use, and therefore that's enough to stop it being muktzah. And we have a chidush l'dina that if we can think of another example of a keli that's completely useless, indeed it would be muktzah. That's Rashi's. I think Rashi and the Ritva's point that they're making. Yeah, I mean the Ritva's mefurish, I think, and Rashi l'chor is the same thing. Yeah.
How long time the Ritva is the first time isn't actually a kli of itself. It's because it attaches itself to a kli that it kind of becomes a part of the kli and gains its status.
So this is a separate sugya of shiorim, that once something's a kli, if it breaks, it's still the londons of a kli is that I've been miyachid it for human use and made it into my slave, and it doesn't cease to be omed for human ishtamshus as long as it was a kli and still has some functionality either any functionality or functionality that's a remainder of its original functionality, which is really the machlokas in the Mishna of Kol HaKelim on Nitolim Shabbos, Shivrei Nitolim Umayim. So it's a Sheva Kli that's Nitolim Umayim, which means it still has a Shem Kli. And as long as it has some functionality, that's enough. Where it has zero functionality, then it would be a Kli, but a Kli that's useless would still be Muktza. That's the translation of Rashi.
So a fully fledged clear that was in a Congress that doesn't have a use because it's in a Congress.
I think that would be the same then. If I don't know if all Kelim don't have uses in Congress, but according to this reading, even a fully fledged clear would be the same. Yeah, because we have to bite the bullet. Rava is saying that it is a clear, and nonetheless, because it's useless, it would be Muktza. That's according to Rashi.
Would that even apply now?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. If you could dream up, I'm not sure of a scenario, but if you could find a clean that was completely useless. No, because they're still only fish just when you get light. I don't know if that would be the same. I just want to reflect on, so give me 10 seconds, because I do want to reflect on Karen's point. You're interesting thing, I mean, without getting too sort of scientific about it, if you think of dimensions, if location is dimension, time is, if it's located in a particular place, we're arguing it's useless in that place, therefore it's Muktza. So you're saying if it's in a particular time zone, it should be useless. Nonetheless, I think Yeshiva-style. I don't think the argument is it can't move place on Shabbos, whereas time will inevitably change. Yeah, it will. It happens now. I can't use it, but a little later I will be able to use it. Yeah, I was trying to rack my brains for an example of this. I have in the back of my mind a discussion. We touched on this very, very briefly right at the beginning of books, and then I decided to stay clear on it because it was a bit overwhelming. But there was a Bal Hamor that we looked at about useless Kelim. We did very vaguely touch, sort of fumble around this topic, but it's too much for me to handle at the moment. Other than just in Cheshbon of the Gemara, one day when we try and put the whole of Muktza together, we're going to meet a discussion about useless Kelim, completely useless Kelim, far away that Rashi's reading of Rava is that Rava is saying this is, even though it's a lomda shekli, because in a chotze it's got a shem kli, nonetheless, since in its current location it's useless, Rava would agree that's Muktza. Sorry, Adam was waiting patiently, yeah. Apologies. So I kept you waiting too long and then you've forgotten it. Yeah. Oh, I see.
No. And everyone has to make an assumption that in the world of Shivrei,
yeah,
that's something which was a clean and has a use. You need the two conditions, but it doesn't mean for a full clean you need the two conditions. I was just going to say that it doesn't have to follow that just because we've learned from Rafa based on this Ritva that you need, when you have in the world of the Heves Katana, you need the two conditions. You have to have come from a kli and it has to have a use. It doesn't necessarily mean that with a full kli, it has to have a use.
I can't prove you wrong, but I don't really hear the reasoning of that. It seems to me that if Rava is saying this is a kli because in a chotz it's a kli, and nonetheless, since here it's useless, where we're not able to have some minimal use of using it to clean yourself from mud, it would be Muktza. That svara should apply to a complete kli also. I don't see why it shouldn't apply even to a kli mamish. Yeah.
If we apply the Ritva interpretation from the end to the beginning, so we understand how it applies to Rava, and I can see how it can go to Rav Nachman Ledide.
Yes.
We need both. How does it work with Rav Nachman, Rav Shmuel, who said that once you're in the Carmelit zone, it stopped being Torah Kli? So how does it remove? What was his reasoning for taking the Torah Kli? So there is a use.
One, according to Rashi, again, let me lay out the structure of the sugya and the different Rishonim, and then I'll answer your question. There's two explanations you could come up with why Rava holds even in Rosh Hashanah it's not Muktza. Explanation one is because in a chotzer it's a kli and therefore it has a shem kli. A kli is a kli is a kli. Explanation number two is because in Rosh Hashanah it has a use. Basically, the landscape is going to look as follows. Rashi says you need both. We're just talking about Rashi. The Rambam is going to say you only need that it's enough that it's a kli in a chotzer. That's Rava's point. And Rabbi Yochanan is going to say it's enough that it has a minimal use where it is, and that's Rava's point. So that's going to be the structure of the landscape. Two possible reasons why you could speculate Rava's explanation, either because he's saying, I don't care that it's in Rosh Hashanah, but in a chotzer it's a kli, so it's a kli. That's what the Rambam says. The second svara would be, No, it still has a use. Okay, it's a pretty lousy, poor use, but it's still got use, and therefore it's not Muktza. That will be how Rabbeinu Chananel understands Rava. And Rashi wants to have his cake and eat it, thinks that you need both svaras. Now, where would Shmuel argue on that? Either of them. I don't know. He or both. He would say, according to Rashi, it would be enough that he argues on one of them because Rashi thinks you need both. And according to the Rambam, so Shmuel either would say, no, doesn't matter, it's a cleaner chotzer, but outside the chotzer it loses its shame kli. Or he would say, I consider this weak, wimpish use too little to use. You could argue on both or either, and that would allow him to disagree with Rava. Okay. So that's the summary, really, of the sugya. That's just, we've mentioned Rashi inside. I think we've seen that. At least that's how the Ritva learns Rashi. Without the Ritva, I'd be a bit tentative in reading Rashi. It's a difficult Rashi to understand, but that's how the Ritva understands it. On the source sheet, I printed the Rambam in. I did print the Rambam. Okay, Baruch Hashem. Panicking a bit for a moment. Number 2. Cheres Katana. He's just quoting Gemara. Muktza the Tal Shel Afili B'Shus Rabbim. Hoyol v'Ru'uyi B'Chatz L'Chasik Bei. Cotton. So all the Rambam says is since in the Chotzer it's a kli, therefore even in Rishus Rabbim it's a kli. So he says a very simple story that way around. And Rabbeinu Chananel, which I hope I printed also. Yeah, I did print Rava Sava. Fili Rishus Rabbim Chazid Kaburi Beitin of a Shari Tutzuli Patami. Patami is a Rava holds. There's enough that it has a shtamshus, and therefore that's enough. So that's just a summary of a layout of the sugya. I just want to point out that sort of in the maths of the sugya, by the way, I should say one of the reasons why I struggled to find anyone who discussed what Shmuel and Nachman's point is because of course we don't paskin like that, so it doesn't end up Halacha Maisa. We do paskin like Rava, but these 3 reasons will affect how you paskin. What happens if you have basically each combination is going to be enough gemina. What happens if you have something which can be used to wipe mud, but couldn't be used to cover anything in a chotzer? So Rashi and the Rambam would say it's Muktza, and Rabbi Chananel says, I don't care whether it's a Kelim in a chotzer, it's not Muktza because you can use it to wipe things off. Then you can have the opposite way around. What happens if you have something which can be used as a Kelim in a chotzer, but is useless in the Shus Rabbim? Rabbi Chananel and Rashi would say it's Muktza, and the Rambam would say, I don't care that it's useless in the Shus Rabbim because it can be used in a chotzer. So that's just the sort of maths of the sugya.
Does he hold that even stones which have been used are not Muktza?
No, and this is you'd have to add l'chura in Rabbi Chananel that this is that since it comes from a kli, that's enough. The lingering coming from a kli is enough, even though currently this is all that gives it the shame kli. That you'd have to say. Otherwise, that's the Ritva's question. He says even stones are enough for that. So the answer is true, but stones aren't muchen, whereas this is muchen. It's his, because what happens if it's no longer a kli in a chotzer? Let's say it's too small l'chasos pichovis in a chotzer. So it ceases to be a kli completely. Nonetheless, it came from a kli, and
This is just that it became kli. Was it kli in the chotzer?
That's the Ritva says. It has to. Rashi and the Ritva says it has to be a kli in the chotzer. Yeah. The Rashi, the Ritva, and the Rambam. Correct. It has to now be a kli. Yeah. Rashi, the Ritva, and the Rambam also it has to now be a kli.
No, I'm thinking the other way around. The Ritva versus Rabbeinu Chananel is quite a small distinction. The Ritva saying it was a kli in the chotzer. Rabbeinu Chananel is it was a kli in some existence.
No, the Ritva though has to say more. He has to say it's fitting and suitable now to be a kli in a chotzer. No, they're not. Rabbeinu Chananel says it's enough that it was a kli, even though now it's not a kli. The Ritva says no, now it's a kli in a chotzer. In the chotzer, it would be a kli now.
Kli in the chotzer, but in the Masechet Shabbat world, it was a kli in the chotzer and it still has a use in Masechet Shabbat. In Rabbeinu Chananel, you're saying it was a kli, but not in the chotzer.
Yeah, but
it was a kli prior to the chotzer. It was smashed up, went into the chotzer, and it still has a use.
What you're saying is each word is correct, but it's. I want to summarize what you're saying with different vocabulary because it brings out a crucial point, which is that Rabbeinu Chananel is saying, even though currently it's not a kli, I don't care because it has a use. And the Ritva is saying the point is currently it is a kli, it has a shame kli, because in a chotzer it's a shame kli, and that's what's sufficient. So Rabbeinu Chananel says I don't care whether it's a kli anymore. It has a use, and the Ritva says no, it's the shame kli that it has, as does the Rambam. It's the shame kli that is critical over here because it has a shame kli, and the fact that in the current location you can't use it, who cares? It still has a shame. It still has a shame kli. I just want to remind you, just finally, just in the last, we've gone over that time, in the last minus 1 minute left, of a discussion we had in much earlier in when the Mishna says that broken Kelim are, which become useless, are osa, does the Mishna mean completely Muktza? Or does it mean that Muktza, but they would be allowed to serve from the Sod Makomam? We had that discussion. So the Mishna says that a Shevet Keli, which Mishna says, Vachiyu Osa Me'in Melacha. That means if you have a Shevet Keli that's not Osa Me'in Melacha, it's Muktza. How Muktza is it? Muktza like Klisha Melachot Issa, but it would be allowed to serve Gufo, or Muktza Machmas Gufo, that is not allowed at all. The colleagues of Rava who attacked his use of this Shevet Keli, why are they attacking his use? Even if it's Muktza and they disagree with him, but he's using it as Serve Gufo to wipe dirt off. Says the Prima Godim, this is a raya that a Shevet Keli, which isn't even good enough to use for Me'in Melacha, for even just covering something, would be the strictest form of Muktza, wouldn't even be allowed L'Tzorech Gufo. Does this ring a bell, this discussion at all? Again, the Mishnah says a Shevet Keli is nittel imakeli, is not Muktza, where it still has a use. Mashma, I mean, that's what the Mishnah is coming to say, that if it doesn't have a use, it is Muktza. How Muktza? Would it be allowed to serve Kufa or not? You see here from Rava being attacked and having to defend themselves and saying, no, I don't think it's Muktza because it's still got use in the Chotza, however we understand it. Why are they criticizing Rava? Maybe even Rava agrees it's Muktza. He's just saying it's being used as serve Kufa because you're using it to wipe dirt. Evidently, when the Mishnah says that a broken Keli is Muktza, it means to say it's the highest form of Muktza. It's not even Muktza. It's not Muktza Machmas Issa equivalent. It's Muktza to serve Kufa, even can't be used as serve Kufa or the serve Makomo. With that, we conclude in the points I wanted to say on this sort of stretch of the Mishnah. Emir Hashem, we will carry on Sunday on the final words of the Amud, Amr Yehuda, Amr Shmuel, Magofis Chavis, etc. And that's where we're going. Everyone, a good evening. Thank you very much.